All right, good afternoon, everybody in the internet, in the Mr. Walker's class. How you doing? We got one last section of this notebook, and it's pretty fun. Not gonna lie. What we're talking about now is what happens when we take I, that number that we get from the imaginary numbers, and what happens when we take that to different powers. So let's take a look at this. We got a little bit of practice here that you're gonna need to fill in. We got a couple blanks here, about 12 of them. So first off, we need to just go over where to get I. So to get I in the calculator, you need to press the second key and then the decimal point. So you see right here, that little I, that is what we are looking for. There is a blue I in here in capitals, but we don't want that. So I'm making sure that I specify second decimal point. All right, so let's look at this in the calculator. We are going to be taking I to a couple of different powers and see what happens because there's a lot of different things that happen. So let's look. It's like it fits right on top. So there we go. We got second I, and we're going to take it to the first power right now. So I to the first, we know anything to the first power is itself, so that's I. So let's just go through, let's write that out. Let's put an I. Okay, let's look at the next one. I squared. Now, I squared happens to give us a negative 1. Why is this giving us negative 1? Okay, that's a little different. So let's just write that down. Let's see what happens as we go through this. Oop, that's a 2. We need a 1. All right, next one. We got I. This time we're taking it to the third power. I to the third power gives us a negative I. That's a little weird. So let's look. We got negative I. And then for the next one, we put I to the fourth. I to the fourth power is positive 1 this time. What is going on here? Positive 1. Okay. So, a couple things here. We know we get I from the negative part of taking a square root. So let's just look at what would give us normally just I. Okay? So normally we get I from taking the square root of a negative number. So let's say negative 1. This gives us just I. Now, us taking this negative square root giving us I and taking this to different powers will give us these different numbers that we see here. So let's see. If I took the square root of negative 1 and I took that to the second power, what happens is I'm doing the square root of something and then I'm squaring that answer. What is actually happening is I'm undoing what I just previously done, which is why I get negative 1 here. If you wanted to see other things like that, that's kind of like taking the square root of 49 and then squaring that answer. See, we know the square root of 49 is 7, and 7 squared gives us right back to 49. So squaring something and unsquaring it undoes each other. So back to our example with the square root of negative 1. Let's hop on back over here. If I take the square root of negative 1 to the third power, what happens is I have 3 things that are showing up here. I have 3 of these square roots of negative 1s. Now, all 3 of these are being multiplied to each other, so 2 of them multiply together to give us negative 1. And there's 1 left over, which gives us I, which is how we end up getting that negative I there. See, this is really the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1, like I was talking about earlier. And 2 of these gives us an negative 1 because they undo each other. And this last one left over, that gives us an I. Now, if I look at the square root of negative 1 to the fourth power, that's the same thing as me taking I to the fourth. This is making it so I have 2 square roots of negative 1. That gives me 1. And I have 2 more square roots of negative 1 multiplied together. That gives me another 1, which is what would give me this one here. So, quick of a little bit of a long-winded explanation, but it's good for us to see this in the calculator. Now let's go through these other ones here just so you can see. All right, so this time we're taking the square root of, well, not square root. We're going to take I, just so we have less things to type. So I to the 5th power is I again. And then if I take I to the 6th power, what is going to happen here? So I to the 6th power gives us that negative 1 again. That is definitely something here. So I'm going to take a gamble here, and I think that this next one, 7, is going to give us a negative I. So let's see what this gives us. All right, so I'm going to go through. I'm going to have I, and I'm going to actually go through and type it out. I just feel a little fancy today. So I times I, that's I squared, times I, that's I to the 3rd, times another I, that's to the 4th, times another I, that's to the 5th, and times another I, that's the 6th, and times another I, that's the 7th. And when we hit that, that gives us a negative I here. So you might be noticing that there is a pattern that is forming. We are actually getting what we got in the previous thing. So see, as we got I here, negative 1 here, and negative I here, this next one would actually give us a 1. Now, you may see that for these two, you ended up getting something a little different when we just plugged it in there. Sometimes you might have to go through and do it long form like I just did. So if you do see something a little crazy like that, like I know I happen to see something crazy, giving me this old crazy thing. But I know I could just double check that by actually multiplying out all the i's. So it might help for us to just not do that one. So we're seeing that there's a pattern forming here. Bam, bam. So that these two are both I. This next one should also give us an I. Since these both are negative 1, this next one should also give us a negative 1. And if this one's negative I, same thing with this one, negative I. And if this one is 1 and so is this one should be a 1 too. So is there a pattern forming for this? So the pattern goes I, then negative 1, then negative I, and then 1 in groups of 4. So every 4 numbers, this pattern goes like this. I, negative 1, negative I, 1, and then it jumps back over here. All right, so with this in mind, what could be used to find these two answers right here, okay? So I know I'm up here at 12. So the next 4 numbers are 13, 14, 15, 16. So when we get back over here to I to the 16th, we should be getting 1 again. Then the next one is I to the 17th, which is going to bring us right back over here, which would mean that I to the 17th should be giving us 1 as well. Not 1, I, sorry. So, if that's the case for this, what would happen with 26? So I'm going to keep going 26. Right now I'm at 12. If I went up another 12, which would make me at 24, that would bring me out 1 again. So I to the 24th would be 1. 25th would be I. 26 would be negative 1. Now, could you actually go through and do the multiplication for all these? Yeah, you sure could. You could also go through and take these and Google it. So we could just take one of these. Let's just Google it. I to the 17th power, I. I to the 26, negative 1. Same thing. So let me go back over this. We see this pattern forming here. So let's just make sure we clarify this. So to find I to any power, I to the n just means that we're multiplying it to any different power, whatever n is, doesn't matter. So first thing, the powers of I are cyclic. That means that it repeats. It's a cycle. So they repeat in a cycle of 4. Okay, just like how we saw before. Now, first thing that we're going to do, in order to find out the cycle, we divide n by 1, and then we're going to look at what the remainder is. And this is actually going to give us a quick little guide to find any power of I real quickly. So, if I divide whatever that exponent is by 4 and I get a remainder of 1, that means that I to that power gives me I. So if I get a remainder of 1, I get I. Now, if I divide whatever that exponent is and I get a remainder of 2 from there, that means that my I is going to be a negative 1. Now, if I take that power and divide it by 4 and I get a remainder of 3, that means that I should be getting a negative I. And then finally, if I divide it and I get a remainder of 0, this means that it's divisible by 4. I get an answer of 1. So this is a quick way of going through and doing any of these. Now, when we come back in next week, we're going to do a little more practice with these. So, what your job is to hit up your Khan Academy, do some of these maths, and I'm going to catch you on the flippity flip. See you later, dudes.